The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We recently talked about how natural gas mining can be really bad for the environment due to the methane leaks that sometimes occur. And per amount leaked, methane is far worse, far more damaging to the environment than carbon dioxide. We have a story here which really should be national news, and it is not. I have footage to play for you that our TV audience will see from December 17th, which shows a geyser of methane gas spewing from the earth. And as you can see here, if you're watching, it is visible via a specialized infrared camera operated by an Earthworks ITC certified thermographer. The Environmental Defense Fund released the footage last week. This is, quote, one of the biggest leaks we've ever seen reported and, quote, absolutely uncontained. This story really should be nonstop national news, but you probably haven't even heard about it. This is from Porter Ranch. It's a small town in California, and it's been stinking of natural gas leakage since October 23rd. A storage facility is spewing methane, and it has now forced thousands of people out of their homes to avoid the dangerous fumes that can cause illness. The California Air Resources Board shows that the methane gas is spewing into the air at a rate of somewhere between 44,000 and 58,000 kilograms per hour. This is an insane amount, Lewis, and Los Angeles city attorneys reached a settlement with SoCalGas to arrange temporary housing for residents that are affected. People have been relocated, over 2,000 families relocated. The fumes pose a huge threat. This is huge, and we're hearing almost nothing about it on corporate media.
And I'm not sure why that is. I mean, disasters, natural disasters, things like that always get tons of media attention. Whenever families are displaced,
right,
there's lots of media coverage. The tornadoes, for instance, that just happened.
And sometimes that's a couple dozen families, right? We're talking about over 2,000 families here directly related to fossil fuels.
And I don't know. I doubt that the corporate media outlets we're talking about have connections to this company. That's highly unlikely. So I'm not sure. I don't really have an answer here.
And to be clear, Wall Street analysts are saying that this incident is analogous to the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill, which was one of the biggest environmental disasters, period. And part of the problem in stopping the leaks here is that the base of the well is 8,000 feet underground. So initial efforts to stop the leak have not been successful. And remember, as I mentioned, methane, the main component of natural gas, is 25 times more potent than carbon dioxide when it comes to its climate change impact. This is a huge, huge deal. 1/4 of the human-caused global warming that we've been experiencing is attributed to methane emissions. And so let's get to that question of why this is not national news. Is it because the visuals aren't as interesting? The leak is 8,000 feet underground, so you don't have those amazing visuals that were running 24/7 on CNN as Anderson Cooper described what was going on? Is it an issue of following the money? I don't know, because the BP is also a big funder, and they were literally advertising on CNN during the commercials about the coverage of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. I don't know the answer, Lewis, but people are not aware of this, and this is huge, huge, huge.
Well, I think it's kind of just starting to break out.
Even though it's been 2 months.
Well, the coverage is
right.
The coverage is just starting to break out. Yes, this has been going on for months. Maybe the residents didn't speak up as much as they should have, but it's happening in California. It's certainly not an area where there's no people around.
No.
Strange.
We have to get off of this stuff. We just don't need natural gas. We really don't if we make the right decisions going forward. The entire Bernie Sanders DNC data breach is taking a sort of interesting turn. You might remember last week, the Bernie Sanders campaign was in trouble over a breach of data that led the Democratic National Committee to cut off Bernie Sanders' campaign access to the database, but they gave it back after the Bernie Sanders campaign filed the lawsuit. The Sanders campaign also fired the staffer in question, and that is where this is taking an interesting turn. An unnamed Bernie Sanders campaign advisor is implying that the staffer who they fired for breaching that voter data was a plant by the Democratic National Committee. Now, I want to talk about whether breach is even the right word, Lewis, but before we talk about that, the unnamed Sanders advisor spoke with Yahoo News and said that the staffer they fired, whose name is Josh Uretsky, came recommended by not just people close to the DNC, but by NGP Van, which is the firm that the DNC contracted to run the voter database. The advisor said, it's not as if we conjured this guy from thin air. He was reportedly recommended by the DNC's national data director. The advisor is calling this utter hypocrisy. Let's take a look at what he had to say. I mean, here we are being attacked for the behavior of an individual, which we ultimately fired. We agree he acted improperly, but it's just amazing to me that this individual that actually caused this trouble in our campaign was recommended by these guys. Interesting story. I don't think we can say it was a plant at this time, Lewis. It might just have been a really bad recommendation, right?
Yeah, could have been. I think people are starting to reach a little bit. But then again, would it really surprise you, given everything we've heard lately?
We have outlined a number of ways, any number almost, of ways in which the DNC appears to be putting its hand on the scale to help Hillary Clinton. This involves a more broad-reaching conspiracy of recommending someone who then you will ultimately blame for having breached data. And by the way, I don't know that the term breach is correct here. There was no firewall, right? There was a glitch which just opened the data. So to say that there was any hacking or breach, I think is factually wrong. There was a security lapse by the DNC's vendor who ran this database, but I don't even know that the term breach is accurate here.
Well, I don't know, because I'm thinking of laws which would kind of make this, okay, the ag-gag law, for example.
Yeah.
Now, you may be standing on the road next to one of these factory farms. You can see it. Everyone can see it. You can fly over it. But as soon as you take a picture, it's illegal.
Even
right?
if you've not forced your way in, so to speak.
Right. Yes.
Interesting.
It kind of reminds me of a similar situation in a way. But
yeah,
I mean, did anything even illegal happen in this particular case by the law?
Yeah, I don't know that this is a question. No, this is not a question of legality.
Right.
No, certainly not. I mean, I think that the point is that this was unethical and that they're not supposed to have access to that data. Therefore, they should not have generated those voter lists. In any case, has taken an interesting turn now, and we'll follow it and see what ultimately happens. The Justice Department has charged more than 60 people in terrorism-related crimes in 2015. This is a record high, okay? Officials say that the heightened threat from the Islamic State and the influence of social media on potential recruits are a factor, saying, according to John Carlin, Assistant Attorney General for National Security, the common connection we're seeing is in almost every case a tie to social media. More than 55% of those charged are under 25 years old. And according to Carlin, one of the most troubling pieces of data is that 1/3 of those charged with terrorism-related charges during 2015 are 21 years old or younger. He said in a discussion with the Atlantic Council last month, quote, "That's not the same age demographic that we saw with Al-Qaeda, which tended to have older operatives." Some interesting questions here. Question number one is there really more terror, or are there more actions which are classified as terrorism related, right? I mean, that's a really big question. We have to, when we say there's more terror, it's like saying there's more autism. Is there more autism, or are we diagnosing more autism? And I think that's an interesting question to talk about here.
Yeah. Well, it's not terror, it's the threat of terror, right?
Terrorism related.
Terrorism related. So there's a good chance that none of these people actually, committed any type of terrorist act, but they may have been plotting. They may have just been discussing it online. And so now that ISIS is so prominent on social media and the internet, you have situations where it's much easier to find the people that are talking with them, that might be collaborating with them, or just praising them.
That's part one. But you know what part two is, and that's, we understand the FBI gets involved in this luring of would-be terrorists. And I told this crazy story of how the FBI, and it's widely documented, the FBI a couple of years ago sent an undercover to a covert operative to sort of infiltrate a casual environmental activism group And ultimately, two of the members in that group were charged with plotting an eco-terrorist attack, so to speak. But it turned out that it was the FBI operative who sort of planted the idea of doing something big in the minds of this group. It doesn't seem at all that they would have even thought of doing such an act if it weren't for the FBI operative. The FBI operative also connected them with the people to provide the resources and funding to carry this out. It's not legally entrapment, but we have to think about whether that's a good use of FBI time, and I think it applies to these terrorism cases as well.
Yeah, we definitely need to ask, and I mean, this goes back a long time, how frivolous are these charges, and are there people being charged with almost no evidence? I mean, certainly we've seen over the past decade or so the stories of people being detained indefinitely against their will in black sites who ended up having no connections at all to terror.
And no charges ever filed, obviously. And then the last thing, Lewis, is we also need to wonder if the number would be even higher of people charged with terrorism and terrorism-related charges if we were just as aggressive with U.S.-born white terrorism-linked individuals as we are with those loosely affiliated with the ideologies of ISIS and ISIL. That's a broader discussion that we've had before, but we know that we don't... law enforcement is less inclined to use the term terrorism when we're talking about actions or plans by U.S.-born white individuals.
That is true, but I will say that lately, I think they have been doing a good job because there have been many foiled plots by white terrorists in this country.
To say foiled, I mean, I think mostly as the result of the white terrorists messing up, right? I mean, we talked about a report.
They're kind of more in your face and vocal about their pro-white sentiment and their beliefs in this country.
People calling police, though, saying, my neighbor is building bombs, and then 3 days later, police show up and almost begrudgingly take the guy in, right? I mean, I don't know that that's really police foiling the plot.
Whereas and by comparison, the neighbor of the San Bernardino shooters was too afraid to call the police because of Islamophobia phobia.
You're right. Yeah, no, there's a number of elements to this, no shortage of discussion. I'm open to hearing your thoughts about it. I'm on Twitter at dpackman, and Lewis is on Twitter at lewismotamedy.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show is mostly funded by viewers and listeners through something called membership. Today's new member of the day is William McMonigal. William, thank you so much for being a David Pakman Show member. You can join William, read about and sample the member benefits, and sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. And please, on January 1st, we will be doing a huge 2016 related membership special. All you need to do to be notified of it on January 1st is get on our newsletter. You can sign up at davidpakman.com. Big 2016 membership special on January 1st, 2016. If you ever shop on Amazon.com, remember to first go to davidpakman.com/Amazon and bookmark that link. Use it whenever you shop. Lewis, somebody's streaming the film Spirited Away. I have not seen much anime, but Spirited Away is one of the few films I have seen, and I really liked it. I mean, if there's more stuff like Spirited Away, I could maybe get into anime.
Okay, I haven't seen this, but is that Miyazaki?
Yeah.
Okay, I know, I have to admit, I don't think I've seen any of his work.
Right.
At least that I can think of offhand now, but everyone seems to love his stuff. Yeah.
Also, somebody using our Amazon link to purchase a Cuisinart rice cooker. I have all sorts of kitchen gadgets, Lewis, but I don't have a rice cooker, and I honestly don't know that I need one. I mean, is it that inconvenient to just take the 35 minutes to cook rice the normal way? It doesn't, maybe if the rice comes out way better in the rice cooker, but my kitchen is already overloaded with stuff.
The rice cookers will give you much better rice.
Really?
Very fluffy.
Wow.
But you got to get the correct rice, but it does make rice far superior to just boiling it in a pot.
How much more stuff can I have? It's like I've got the food processor, I have the ice cream maker, the pasta maker, I've got a coffee grinder, the French press and the espresso machine, a slow cooker. I don't have a rice cooker, I don't have a mixer, which is a big one, and I think I just don't have the room for this stuff in my kitchen,
Well, I mean, you don't need it, right?
No, certainly
It's
not.
like, you know what actually works pretty well is that frozen Trader Joe's rice that comes in a bag that you just put in the microwave for 3 minutes.
Now that sounds crazy.
Oh, no, it comes out great. I'm serious.
All right, I take Lewis's word for it. And a special thank you to the kind audience member who ordered 3 $1,800 camera lenses through our Amazon link last week. Thank you very much. And remember, davidpakman.com/Amazon before doing any Amazon shopping whatsoever. Let's talk a little bit about Anonymous. We haven't talked about Anonymous for a little while. And to set this up, remember how Turkish President Erdogan recently said that he is increasingly against the internet every day? I would assume that President Erdogan hates internet hacktivist group Anonymous, but maybe they've done something now that President Erdogan would actually be happy about. The hacking collective Anonymous is claiming responsibility for any number of cyber attacks on Turkey's internet, taking down hundreds of thousands of the country's websites. In a video, the sort of loosely organized group, right? Anonymous is not one group of people. People claiming to be part of Anonymous said that they are sick of Turkey supporting the Islamic State and that they were ready to do something and that they did do something, that they have declared cyber war on ISIS and that as a result, they have taken down hundreds of thousands of websites in Turkey. When I was reading this, Lewis, I was just thinking how funny it is. On the one hand, you're President Erdogan. You don't like the internet. You've made it clear you don't like the internet. You want to stifle free speech. Maybe you're thrilled that Anonymous has hacked hundreds of thousands of your country's websites. At the same time, if you get hacked by Anonymous, it doesn't necessarily project strength to be hacked by Anonymous. So maybe he's not happy. I don't know what Erdogan is thinking at this point.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I think he's probably a guy who doesn't use the internet himself. Seems to have a limited understanding of it. But anyway, Turkey is an interesting place when it comes to the internet. So much of the fraudulent internet stuff happening around the world is coming out of Turkey.
Right.
And, well, interesting battle we have going on here.
And it is true that Turkey has faced criticism for not going after ISIS and ISIL proactively, especially given how close Turkey is to Syria and Iraq. And we're actually hoping to talk about that soon in some upcoming interviews. That's a real issue. This more about President Erdogan and his thoughts about the internet. What do you do? Like, what are you being told about the internet to be more against the internet every day? Most days, my favor for the internet doesn't change. But if anything, I become more in favor of the internet. Like, where are you in your life? Or who are you talking to? Where each day you go, you know, I'm more against the internet today than I was yesterday.
I think you have to be a non-user if you are against the internet. I think you don't understand it because he looks at it as someone who doesn't use it and sees it as only sees it as a place where people can openly voice dissent or something like that. You know, he sees no other qualities.
He's not seeing the upside for him, and apparently he's not playing online games or looking up who knows what, so he's not really seeing the benefit of it, I guess. A new study by the Secular Policy Institute says that tax-exempt churches in the United States are costing U.S. citizens $71 billion per year in terms of the tax breaks that they receive. The study claims that religious groups receive about $35 billion in federal income tax subsidies, about $26 billion in property tax subsidies, and in addition to that, $6 billion in state income tax subsidies, about $1 billion of parsonage, and about $2 billion in faith-based initiative subsidies. The Secular Policy Institute reports, let's take a look at what they had to say, Lewis. If religious organizations, in other words, churches, synagogues, mosques, etc., were taxed like for-profit agencies, it was found that this could generate upwards of $71 billion per year in tax revenue. And this is the key part. Even if churches were merely held to the standards of other nonprofit agencies, this could generate $16.75 billion in tax revenue per year. The report estimate for the total subsidies enjoyed by religious organizations, but they do not account for tax credits like sales taxes, local sales, and income taxes, volunteer labor subsidy, and donor tax exemptions. Now, this is a really important thing. Many Americans believe that religious organizations require these heavy tax breaks for use in their charitable works. But researchers at Secular Humanism have reported that many popular churches are not really using much of their funds for charitable work. According to secular humanism, the Mormon Church, for example, spends roughly 0.7% of its annual income on charity. Their study of 271 congregations found an average of 71% of revenues going to operating expenses. Compare this to the American Red Cross, which uses 92% of revenues for physical assistance and just 8% on operating expenses. The authors also note that Walmart, for instance, gives about $1.75 billion in food aid to charities each year, or 28 times all of the money allotted for charity by the United Methodist Church, and almost double what the Mormon Church has given in the last 25 years. This is the key takeaway, Lewis. On the one hand, we have religious tax subsidies and exemptions as they stand now. On the far other side, we have take them all away. But there's an in-between. You can just give churches the same tax benefits as normal, and that's an insane term to use, normal nonprofits, and even that would garner close to $17 billion more for the U.S. every year. This has to end.
Yeah, I'm guessing that, of course, this all started because we had religious members of Congress, religious presidents, and over the years this framework was established. But it's ridiculous, especially when you're looking at the mega churches and all of the nonsense happening there.
And the increased, remember that churches, and I'm guessing by nonsense, Lewis, churches, in order to maintain that tax exemption, you cannot advocate for the election of particular elected officials or around political issues. Churches talk about same-sex marriage. Churches talk about abortion. Many churches talk about which candidates to elect. They should all lose that tax-exempt status. But as John Oliver recently exposed on his program on HBO, there are almost no investigations done by the IRS of these churches. So although they're not supposed to be doing politics, many of them are, and there's very little oversight. And of course, that oversight costs money, Lewis. The cheaper thing is just take away these extra subsidies. Just at least get us back to where a church gets the same subsidies as a non-religious nonprofit. That would be a start that I think a lot of us would be happy with.
Huge start. I'm totally in favor of it. And not just churches. Let's add that the same should apply to mosques, to synagogues, to all religious, whatever you want to call them.
To all religions, absolutely.
Yeah, to all religions.
No question about it whatsoever. After the break, we will talk about artificial intelligence. Very interesting interview, I think. Stay with us.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Ken Stanley, who is an associate professor of computer science at the University of Central Florida, specializing in artificial intelligence and machine learning. He's the inventor of the NEAT algorithm and also the co-author of the new book, Why Greatness Cannot Be Planned. It's so great to have you, Ken. And, recently we've talked about some of the comments made by everybody from Stephen Hawking to Elon Musk, sort of expressing some level of concern about the future of artificial intelligence. And I think sort of a general place to start with you is the conversation about AI being good or bad, good or evil, is that even the right question or to be asking or conversation to be having, or is that in and of itself a sort of misdirected question?
Yeah, so when people ask that question, I think it helps to kind of distinguish whether we're talking about today or the potential future or far future. And I think today, right now, if we're talking about the AIs themselves, it's certainly not good or evil. It's just a program. It doesn't have its own personal motivations, and it's not a person at all. So it's really a question of, are the people using it good or evil, perhaps? So in terms of its use, of course, it can be put to bad use. And in that sense, today, there's always the danger of someone using technology for ill. But in the long run, I think that's what these various commentaries are really about, is in the long run, can something sort of more sinister come out of this, like maybe the AI itself does something sinister on its own volition or something like that. And I think that's very speculative. It's not that we can't talk about it, and we should be aware of even remote possibilities that could be a threat to humanity. But it's really just speculation. There's no current technology that really shows that that's really likely to happen anytime soon. But yeah, sure, we should always be aware and obviously trying to steer away from any scenario like that if it did look like it could become possible.
One of the specific scenarios that now is getting more and more attention is when we think about autonomous vehicles, and these sort of Sophie's Choice type scenarios or trolley problem type scenarios start to come up. Oh, if the vehicle is to decide whether to continue straight on the road and run over 10 people, or to drive off the road, saving those 10 people but killing one civilian on the sidewalk, how should an autonomous vehicle be programmed? Is that type of problem one that you believe is going to be addressed as autonomous vehicles become more and more advanced?
Yeah, actually, I think that will have to be addressed. It is a really interesting problem because, in the past that might have just been sort of abstract philosophy, but it's going to be a practical question if we're really going to have purely autonomous vehicles on the road. Someone somewhere is going to make a decision who programs this vehicle on what to do in various kind of moral choice scenarios. Should you sacrifice the driver of the car to save, a school bus full of children? It's a pretty impossible question to answer. And I'm entirely unsure how something like that should be programmed from an ethical perspective. But I think that we're going to have to confront questions like that. And maybe moral philosophers will actually have another job where they could contribute something here, because it might be more the kind of question that they can answer.
What, in your mind, are the most important moral and ethical questions as you continue to work on and develop more and more advanced artificial intelligence? Are they these types of questions that we've talked about so far? Or if not, I would love to hear from you what you, as someone who works in the field, sees as the paramount moral and ethical questions.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's kind of a spectrum of moral questions. I mean, at one end of the spectrum are these kind of sci-fi scenarios of the machines taking over or becoming evil or something like that. I think that's a remote concern at the moment. And probably, your second question is closer to today's kinds of concerns, like these difficult choices that have to be made sometimes where life and death could actually hang in the balance. And society's going to have to grapple with that. And it's not clear how we're going to do that. It's going to involve the legal profession. It's not just going to involve technologists, because we have to decide how to attribute blame when something goes wrong, and who exactly is going to be held responsible when it's a machine's choice. So those are problems, right, that are not necessarily right now, but maybe coming in the near future. And I think another kind of aspect of morality when it comes to AI is the effect on the economy. When you think about jobs being replaced through automation, that might be like the most immediate concern. It's already happening. And, you can imagine that in the not so far future, something like, if there could be something like a maid bot that, can basically fix up your hotel room just as well as a human or something like that, then a huge class of people could be out of jobs. And it's not totally clear that this is a bad or good, because, I mean, in theory, the benefits might outweigh the costs, and new jobs can open up, and then the savings can be used to facilitate better opportunities for people. But how that all shakes out is
and correct me if
unclear.
I'm wrong, in what I've read, historically, every time there was some new technology that eliminated jobs, it opened up new areas of industry altogether that resulted in a net gain of jobs. But from what I've been reading over the last 18 to 24 months, we seem to sort of be entering a period where the net impact of technology is starting to be a loss of jobs. And that seems to be a big change over the last 150 years.
Yeah, I've heard these different arguments as well, and it looks unclear. I mean, this is probably something new for civilization, where machines really start taking over jobs that took intelligence and coordination. And I don't think we know exactly what the implications are. It would be nice if it's true that it just creates new industries and that sort of just makes up for it. And I think clearly, like you said, that has historically happened. But will it continue to happen, especially as the AI becomes dramatically smarter? It's not completely clear. And economists probably have to think about this and what the implications are going to be for our society.
I'd love for you to talk a little bit about some of the sort of exciting opportunities that exist in the world of AI. Anything from the possibility of human brains being able to sort of group learn skills, for example, or acquire knowledge. What are some of the things that are exciting right now in your field?
Yeah, so one thing that maybe is less talked about is the possibility that artificial intelligence and machine learning could assist in creative endeavors. I mean, we hear a lot about um, AI for automation or for problem solving, or it answers your question or something like that. But what you hear less about, and what I think is also exciting, is the idea that the computer can assist the human in creating something that otherwise neither of them could have been able to create alone. And I think that AI is moving in a direction that is going to facilitate that kind of collaboration more and more. So, in other words, what I mean is, for example, you might not know how to design furniture, you're not an expert, but with the right kind of assistance, you might be able to design furniture just as good as what the experts currently design today. Or cars or houses or art or music, and this kind of technology can potentially crowdsource, so in other words leverage the input of many laymen who don't actually know anything about the area in which they're creating, but the computer basically plugs the holes and leverages the collective implicit wisdom of the crowd, and then you end up with a product that's legitimate. And this kind of technology, I think, is pretty interesting because it liberates us as humans to participate in creating things that otherwise we would have just had to leave to the experts in the past.
I'm curious, as you talk about all of these possibilities and think about also AIs that can themselves sort of learn from their experience, and I don't even know if experience is the right word to be using there. When we talk about the term sentient, do we even know enough yet to intelligently comment on whether self-learning AIs could be what we consider sentient in some sense?
Yeah, I think so. I'm guessing that a lot of scientists, if they were confronted with that question, would say something like, well, we have to define our terms, and basically it's ill-defined what this really means. But I'll try not to dodge it in that way.
Okay.
Let's say we don't define our terms and we just say, okay, sentience is a big deal, and most people have kind of a sense of what they mean. So we just take it as just whatever it feels like it means. It's something big. I think that basically what we feel about sentience is far, far beyond current technology. There's not a hint of it in current AI technology. So we're talking about science fiction. That doesn't mean that it can't happen. And it, you can debate about whether why would it not be possible? That's kind of an interesting question. Like if our brain is effectively just a computational device, which some people believe, then in theory, I guess something that's a computer could someday just do whatever our brain does, and that includes sentience apparently as a side effect of whatever our brain does. So maybe it's possible, but then again, we really don't know what's going on in the brain at that level. That's just far beyond our current understanding. So I would want to be circumspect and sort of leave it open and say, let's be humble and admit that we don't really know what's going on with sentience right now, and it's beyond our current capabilities. But if AI achieves its ultimate ambitious dreams, then it's certainly a possibility that could happen someday.
I'll remind the audience we've been speaking with Ken Stanley, who's an associate professor of computer science at the University of Central Florida. The new book is Why Greatness Cannot Be Planned. Thanks so much for talking to us about this. Very interesting.
Dave, could I add one other thing? Would that
Yes,
be?
please.
Just about the ethical side, because you asked a number of questions about the moral issues that are coming up, and
Yeah.
I just wanted to note that like there some people would say that we should perhaps put the brakes on because we're heading into a danger zone. But the thing I just wanted to add here is that, in my opinion, that's probably not the right way to address if there is going to be a problem like this, because really, if you try to put the brakes on, which basically means regulation, like telling people they can't think about something, then the only people thinking about it are going to be the people who are not ethical, obviously, because they're going to be the people who don't care about what the government or whatever body is saying. Or countries that are rogue are going to be the ones who are investigating this issue, but the countries that are well-intentioned are going to just basically give up on it. And that's just going to lead to a worse scenario. So I think that really what we need, if we're going to worry about the moral implications of AI in the long run, which I think is worth doing, even though I don't think we should be alarmist about it, but what we need if we're going to do that is to try to foster a culture of morality within AI, so that basically we encourage people who are involved in the field, like myself, to steer it in a direction that's ethical. And I think that's really the only way forward, because historically we've never seen the ability to kind of stop the march of technology. It just hasn't happened in history. It just keeps moving. And so what we can do is say, look, if there's a culture of morality that's sort of organic within the community, then any kind of person who wants to do something that's bad or ill-intentioned is probably not going to be able to get the resources and support they need to do what they want, because usually really big projects require a lot of resources and the coordination of a lot of people. And so we'll be able to keep them out organically, basically from within the community and from getting access to that kind of resource, as opposed to kind of top-down regulation, which I think is just futility and probably a lost cause.
Yeah, no, hard to argue against that. Ken Stanley, really a pleasure to have you on today.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We talked about this, I believe, on the bonus show back when it was starting to gain traction, and things are moving forward for Sweden to become a totally cashless country. They're eliminating cash payments at so many places and focusing on electronic payments, credit card, etc. Bills and coins now represent only 2% of Sweden's economy, compared with 7.7% in the United States and 10% in the euro area more broadly. And this year, only 20% of all consumer payments in Sweden have been made in cash, compared to 75% in the rest of the world, according to the Euromonitor International. So what are the upsides and downsides of going cashless? The upsides are, number one, personal safety, right? If you have no cash, you have no cash that could be stolen, whether that's from your home or from your person or whatever. Fraud protection with recourse comes with using electronic payments. That's a really great thing. The possible downsides and the risks are, well, number one, fear of significant increases in electronic fraud, for example. Older adults and refugees in Sweden, for example, are more likely to only have access to cash. They can be marginalized in the economy. And of course, young people who use apps to pay for everything or take out loans via their mobile phones or whatever, they really do risk falling into debt. So I'm in favor of this, Lewis, no question about it. You know that I rarely ever have cash on me. I go out of my way now to try to have somewhere between $20 and $40 on me, and often it will last me a very long time because I barely ever use it. But there are concerns, understandably, and we've seen more cases of digital currency fraud or people getting scammed, et cetera. So there are concerns, but I am absolutely in favor of this.
Yeah, I mean, a lot can go wrong when everything is digital, right?
Sure.
And so if things go horribly, horribly wrong, what do you do when you have no physical form of currency?
It creates a problem, absolutely. Yeah, and that's something that the country is grappling with and aware of. But you have to remember the amount of cash that you really need on a day-to-day basis. People say, well, if credit card processing goes down, we need to have cash available. Fine, but consider that the amount of institutional level money transfers have been electronic for a very, very long time. And of course, if there were something to happen with that system, it would cause absolute economic chaos. But you're never really going to have the cash on hand to handle the massive transfers of money that are happening all the time. So people usually think about, hey, if all of a sudden the grocery stores can only accept cash, it's chaos. People can't get their food. That's not a huge amount of money compared to what we're seeing moving in institutionally, and that amount of cash hasn't been around for a very long time.
That is true. I mean, most of what is being done and handled is digital at this point anyway. But still, there are businesses that only use cash. It's pretty rare these days, but they will be forced to change over.
Right.
And, I'm not worried about the cyber attacks and that type of thing. We're headed in that direction anyway. That's becoming more common all the time. So, that I'm not so worried about.
Do you regularly carry cash? Like, or how much of your day-to-day do you think you manage with cash?
Not much, but if I'm purchasing something small,
right.
There are many places that have a minimum on cards.
Which, by the way, they're not supposed to. And, good luck explaining that to them. But yeah, they're really not supposed to do that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, still, they do. And there are some things that you have to use cash for. It's, we're not as advanced as they are when it comes to moving in towards the cashless economy. So I try to keep, if I go to the ATM, I'll take out $100. It'll last me a while. It's just good to have on you.
Last week, I told you that France is now requiring models to have a doctor's note saying that they aren't too thin. Our discussion was, if too thin models encourage people to be unhealthily thin by glorifying that physical appearance, do overweight models encourage people to be unhealthily overweight by glorifying being overweight? We happen to have some new information about this from this month. Research conducted at Simon Fraser University suggests that the inclusion of plus-size models in advertising does result in less motivation to have a healthy lifestyle, but critics say the results may be overly simplistic. The study claims that one of the reasons why larger-bodied images appear to be contagious when seen in advertising is because it is seen as more socially permissible, especially when coupled with certain types of messaging. We've seen these campaigns that say, beautiful at any size, for example, that type of thing. And the research says this has a real impact. People see that, and then they make worse food choices, according to our study. They have lower intentions to exercise. They have lower support for programs that help to curb obesity. This is a very, very interesting study, Lewis.
It is, and we've kind of talked about this before. We said that perhaps it's not the best thing to be promoting these images as, this is wonderful and just be you, that we need to promote everyone being at a healthy weight and having a healthier lifestyle. And so, I guess I find myself not caring too much about this study, but to me, it's just common sense stuff.
Well, the common sense part might be if you have too thin or too heavy models and you glorify their appearance, you're going to influence the population to follow that. So the logical thing is, hey, just portray healthy weight models. But that's a huge problem, right? What are the limits of healthy? Some people say look to BMI. We've already explained why BMI is absolutely bogus and not an indicator of health. Others said, well, let's use athletes as models. Yeah, well, which athletes from which sport? Many baseball players are not exactly the picture of health. Many weightlifters have a body that is only healthy in the context of a very short span of their lives while they are weightlifting.
Okay, but do we need a scientific consensus on what a healthy weight is? Or do we just say whatever a normal person would look at and see as a healthy weight?
But we know from studies that those who are heavier or thinner see bodies that are closer to theirs as within the norm. So that's problematic. True. Someone emailed me saying, David, it should just be soccer players. Soccer players, you're not going to see the outlier soccer players that are like the baseball players that are out of shape. You're not going to see like the linemen in football that have a body that would not be athletic in any world other than on the football field. We should be looking at soccer players. I don't know. That's one idea, I guess.
I guess it's not bad, but a lot of them are pretty thin. I mean, they're running a lot, and at some point you start to burn muscle too. But
we're kind of getting into the weeds anyway.
Yeah.
But I think very interesting that our suspicions from last week are backed at least by one study. We have a voicemail number, 219-2-DAVID-P. Take a listen to this. I don't know if this guy's calling the wrong show. Check it out.
Yes, you have a wonderful show. This is Kevin from Jeffersonville, Indiana. I think Donald Trump needs to explain to people that on our money that we carry around in our pockets and our wallets have "In God We Trust," not Allah or Muhammad. and I believe everything he's saying to be true. And if he could use that in his conversations with America, he could definitely tell people that we don't need another type of religious fanatic people in our United States of America under God, and that would probably help out his election. And for God's sake, I hope he wins, because if he doesn't, we're going to have to buy a lot of ammunition to keep the terrorism down.
How can anyone who likes our show also believe that, for God's sake, Donald Trump should win? I don't know, but apparently we have one real big Donald Trump fan who is a fan of this program, and that is always interesting. Great bonus show today. Father uses a gun to save his son from doctors. We'll talk about new micro units in New York City and much more. davidpakman.com/membership. Sign up today.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.